Hello and welcome to this new lesson. Today we will talk about soldering accessories, which are tools that you can use to make your soldering job a way much easier. Let's start with soldering iron tips. Try to use the correct size tip whenever you can. As you can see, these are the iron tips. You can replace the iron tips for your soldering iron easily. Smaller wires and circuit boards require smaller fine tips. Mic cables with XLR connectors require larger tips. Types of tips are pointed, flat tips, sometimes called spade tips. As you can see, these are an example of several types of soldering tips. You need to make sure that you are using a small tip for smaller soldering jobs and a larger tip for bigger items. Next, soldering iron stand. As you can see in this image, this is a plastic stand for the soldering iron. You can place it here while you are doing something and keep it fired or keep it on. These are handy to use if you are doing a lot of soldering. It is a heat resistant cradle for your iron to sit in, so you don't have to lie down on the bench while it's hot. It will burn your bench. It can be essential if you are planning to do a lot of bench soldering, as it is only a matter of time before you burn something, probably your elbow resting on the hot tip if you don't use one. So it will cost you about nothing, and it's very helpful, so I recommend it very much. You must get one. Clamps of some sort are strongly recommended. Trying to hold your soldering iron, the solder and the wire is tricky enough, but when you have to hold the connector as well, it's almost impossible. There are, however, adjustable clamps that can be manipulated to hold both the connector and the wire in place, so you will still have two free hands to apply the heat and the solder. As you can see in this image, you can place the wire here and the item here and bring them closer together. Then you can use your both hands, one to hold the soldering iron and the other one to hold the solder to be able to solder item correctly. As you can see, here is one of the options that I use. You can use this option. It's not a great option, but it gets the job done if you are in a place without a clamp. Next is magnifying glass. If you are doing work on PCBs, printed circuit boards, you may need to get a magnifying glass. This will help you see the tracks on the PCB, and unless you have exceptional sight, small chip resistors are pretty difficult to solder on well without a magnifying glass. So you need to have that magnifying glass to see items in a higher scale so that you can solder them right. And going further, let's talk about the solder wick. Solder wick is a mesh that you lie on a joint, and when it heats up, it also melts the solder which is drawn out of the joint. As you can see, this is basically a copper wire that when heated up, it will take the solder out of a board. It is usually used for cleaning up solder from tracks on a circuit board, but you will need a solder sucker to clean out the holes in the circuit board. So this works on the board itself, but if the board has holes with solder inside these holes, this won't work. You will need this item, which we will talk about, solder sucker. Now solder wick. Place the wick on the solder you want to remove, then put your soldering iron on top of the wick. The wick will heat up, then the solder will melt and flow away from the joint and into the wick. It's very simple and very easy, as you can see. You just need to heat it up so that it can suck the solder from the board. Now for the soldering suckers, as you can see, this is one of them. If you work on PCBs, before too long you are going to need one of these. There are a spring-loaded vacuum device that sucks the melted solder out of the joint. They are a bit tricky to use, as you have to melt the solder with your iron, then quickly position the solder sucker over the melted solder and release the spring to suck up the solder. So it will use air vacuum to suck the solder or the melted solder from the board and to clean it. That's it for the accessories. Next we will talk about the main steps in soldering that we mentioned earlier in this course. If you have any question, please ask in the Q&A board. We will add links to purchase each of these items in the resources file. If you have any question again, you can ask it in the Q&A board. We are here to help you. Thanks for watching. This is Educational Engineering Team.